Hi everyone. Today I want to talk about pressure, altitude, and definition, and also how to set the altimeter setting to current altimeter setting, and why set the altimeter setting is very important before each flight. Basically, pressure altitude is read altitude from altimeter when set the altimeter to 992 inch of mercury. What's the 2992? 299 to the standard atmospheric pressure in standard day when the temperature is 15 degrees Celsius. So our pressure altitude calculated by 299 to the standard atmospheric pressure. So for calculate pressure altitude, there is a one formula that we can use always regarding to each station. So this formula equal 29992 minus current altimeter setting multiply 1000 feet plus elevation. What's the 1000 feet? So from sea level, when going up, 1000, 2000, 3000, and going up, for each 1000 feet, pressure will be decreasing 1 inch of mercury. For example, at the sea level local pressure equal 29992. At 1000 feet, pressure equal 2892. Why that we need to this rule of thumb 1000 feet in pressure altitude formula. Let's do one example. Here is sea level and the station right here or airport. For example, runway 25. Elevation in this station equals 0 and local pressure altimeter setting equal 29992. What's the pressure altitude? Regarding this formula equal 29992 standard atmospheric pressure minus current altimeter setting or local pressure 29992 multiply 1000 plus elevation. Elevation equals 0. This one and 0. So pressure altitude in this station is equal 0. How about this altimeter? When you are at the ground and turn the knob by set the 29992, what's the altitude shows in altimeter? So we remember, for read correct height above sea level, you should be set the altimeter to current altimeter setting or local pressure at this station. So when set the altimeter to 29992, altimeter shows height above sea level. So in this station, altimeter shows you 0 feet. Because basically altimeter shows true altitude. What's the true altitude? True altitude height above sea level. So when set the altimeter to local pressure, altimeter shows you true altitude is height above sea level. So in this station also, we can see altitude indicator after set the 29992 shows 0. So pressure altitude equal altitude indicator or true altitude. This is common question you write in exam. So the question is when pressure altitude equal altimeter indicator or true altitude. When we are in standard atmospheric pressure at the sea level, local pressure is equal to 992. That means we are in atmospheric standard pressure. So why that the pressure altitude equal to altitude? Let's do another example. Station is at sea level, elevation equals 0, and local pressure in this station, for example, 2900. What's the pressure altitude? Regarding this formula, standard atmospheric pressure minus local pressure or altimeter setting 2900 multiply 1000 plus elevation equals 0. So we can calculate that by calculator. 2992 minus 2900 multiply 1000 plus elevation. 920 feet above sea level. So pressure altitude equal 920 feet above sea level. How about his altimeter? When set the altimeter by rotating up 2900 at the station at the ground, what's the altitude shows in altimeter? As I mentioned already, I said for read correct height above sea level, you set the altimeter to local pressure. When set the local pressure to 2900, you should be read altimeter 0 feet. So pressure altitude is equal 920 and altimeter indicator or true altitude equal 0. At this station, even we are at sea level, pressure altitude is not equal altimeter indicator because local pressure is 2900. So we are not in standard atmospheric pressure. It doesn't necessarily even when we are at the sea level station, altimeter should be 2992 because local pressure dependent to couple of factors like weather condition, temperature, high pressure or low pressure. So why that each station has a specific local pressure. So at this station, local pressure 2900 in compare to a standard atmospheric pressure is equal to 2992. We are in lower pressure, right? This station has lower pressure. These parameters, one of these parameters can be because for temperature. As we know, when temperature increasing due to the air density decreasing, air density decreasing, pressure decreasing. If temperature decreasing due to the air density increasing, pressure increasing. This is one of the factors that is impacting local pressure. So in this station, we are in lower pressure in compared to standard atmospheric pressure. So when we are in lower pressure, so maybe in this station and temperature increasing. You should be know about that is why we have different local pressure, different station. So let's do another example for better understanding. So at this station we are at elevation is 0. So we are assuming station or airport at 400 feet above sea level. Elevation equal 400 feet. This runway 25 for example, and altimeter set for example 300 inch of mercury. So we want to calculate pressure altitude at this station. So regarding to this formula, standard atmospheric pressure now 299.2 minus current altimeter setting 3000 multiply 1000 feet plus elevation 400 feet. Okay, 299.2 minus 300 multiply 1000 plus elevation 400 feet. Sorry, 299.2 minus 300 multiply 1000 plus elevation 400 feet. 320. So pressure altitude in this station equal 320 above sea level. How about the altimeter? When I rotate the knob at the ground by 300. As you remember, when set the altimeter to local pressure, you should be read height above sea level, right? So when set the altimeter 300, altimeter shows is around this time, approximate 400 feet above sea level. So altimeter indicator or true altitude equal 400 feet above sea level. We can see these two numbers is not equal because we are not in standard atmospheric pressure. So let's talk about what will happen when you set the altimeter setting by wrong number. For example, you are at the ground, get information from a traffic control altimeter 3000. You should be set the 300 feet for it to correct height above sea level, right? Or correct elevation. But you accidentally set the altimeter, for example, 299.5. What will happen? When set accidentally altimeter 299.5, basically you set the altimeter too low. What's the too low? What's that mean too low? This is the true rule of thumb. Number one, when set the altimeter too low, altimeter shows too low. When set the altimeter too high, altimeter shows too high. So when you accidentally set the altimeter by wrong number, in this station and this scenario, you set the altimeter too low. Right? From elevation, calculate. Current local pressure 300 minus current altimeter setting that you did 29905 multiply 1000. 3000 minus 29905 multiply 1000. 50 feet above sea level. So set to altimeter too low and compare, because this number compared to local pressure is a lower number, resulting you set the altimeter too low. Altimeter shows too low how much? 50 feet. 50 feet from the elevation. Elevation is equal 400 feet minus because altimeter set too low. 50 feet equal 300 feet above sea level. So resulting altimeter shows 350, right? So in scenario number one, altimeter shows 350. So how about you set the accidentally altimeter too high? So when set the altimeter too high, for example, set the altimeter 3005. This number in compared local pressure at this station is higher, resulting you set the altimeter too high accidentally. Altimeter shows too high or increasing. How much? 3000 local pressure minus altimeter setting 3005 multiply 1000 equal 3005 minus 50. I will talk about minus. So set the altimeter too high. How much too high? 50 feet. From which? From elevation. So elevation is equal 400 feet plus, because you set the too high, equal 400 feet. So resulting altimeter shows 400 feet above sea level. So we remember in Canada, in southern domestic area, from surface sea level up to 18,000 feet above sea level, you should be set altimeter to current altimeter setting. And above 18,000 feet, you should be set to 9er2. This is aviation regulation in Canada. You should be know about that. Just I want to explain. So now let's talk about what will happen when set the altimeter setting wrong number at the air. When you take off from this station, what will happen at the air in the flight? Let's do one example. So, and this scenario altimeter shows 400 feet, right? Okay. At this station 400 above sea level, you have planned to go to the circuit for practice. Regarding to the cars in the Canada, left-hand circuit and 11 circuit height is equal 1000 feet plus elevation. So 1000 feet plus elevation is 400 feet, 1400 feet above sea level, right? So circuit height 1000 feet above sea level. After set the wrong number in altimeter, this is scenario number 1. Right? In scenario number 1, we set the altimeter too low. So altimeter at the ground shows 350. You start to take off and climb, dependent to climb by via X or via Y. Somewhere here, you should be at 1400 feet above sea level regarding to altimeter. So when confirmed by altimeter 1400 feet above sea level, you level up and continue downwind. So altimeter shows you 1400 feet above sea level, right? But actual height or physically you are at higher than altimeter indicator. So actual height is equal, you set the 50 feet below secret height, below actual height, and when you are at the flight in the air, or actual height equal 1450. This is for scenario number 1. Let's do what will happen in scenario number 2. After the set the altimeter the wrong number, set too high, altimeter shows 400 feet at the ground. After takeoff, VX or VY or somewhere here, you are in 1400 feet. This is for scenario number 2. By confirm altimeter 1400 feet, somewhere here, you level off and continue downwind. Altimeter shows 1,400 feet above sea level, but actual height, due to the set the altimeter too high, 50 feet above the actual height, when you are at the flight in the air, actual height shows you 1,300 feet, 1,350 feet above sea level. In scenario number one, you are safe because you are 50 feet above sea height. But this scenario, when set accidentally altimeter too high, is dangerous because you are 50 feet lower than altimeter indicator. So this is more dangerous when you have to fly at night, because at night vision will be decreasing, and also when we have to plan to go cross country, especially when fly over the mountain, because you need to exactly height above the ground by monitor altimeter and also set the current altimeter setting. A little confusing, I know, but by more practice and more example, you can have better understanding. For this scenario, we have two rule of thumb. If you memorize that, you can answer all questions related to altimeter setting. Number one, when set the altimeter, set altimeter too low, altimeter shows lower than actual height, right? But you are physically higher than altimeter indicator. In scenario number one, you set altimeter too low, altimeter shows lower than actual at the ground. At the flight, you are physically higher than altimeter indicator is here. When you are in the air at the flight, actual height is 50 feet above or higher than altimeter indicator. So number two, when set the altimeter accidentally too high, altimeter shows higher than actual height, resulting you are physically lower than altimeter indicator. In scenario number two, you set the altimeter too high, so when you are in actual flight, actual height is 50 feet lower than altimeter indicator. If you memorize this rule of thumb, you can have better understanding related to altimeter setting and you can answer all questions related to altimeter setting. This is fundamental and basic knowledge related to pressure altitude and how calculate pressure altitude, and also why we need to set the altimeter setting to current altimeter or current local pressure at the station, because each station regarding to temperature, low pressure, high pressure, weather condition, you have different local pressure or altimeter setting. So another thing that you should be know, this formula pressure altitude you can calculate when you are at the ground, but when you are at the air, for calculate pressure altitude you don't need to use this formula. For example, you are in flight level 5,500, right? You set the altimeter just 29902, read altitude from altimeter, this is pressure altitude. That's it. So when you are at the air in flight, just you need to set by rotate the knob 29902, read altitude from altimeter. That altitude is pressure altitude. And after noticing pressure altitude, you can again back altimeter setting that you did already. So in the air, for know about this was the pressure altitude, because there are a couple of reasons. One of reason you need to calculate true airspeed. In true airspeed, you need to calculate pressure altitude, and in the air, just because pressure altitude just related to standard atmospheric pressure 29902, just we need to set altimeter 29902. Hopefully this information useful for student pilot, and in next video I will talk about much more related to pressure altimeter setting in different area and different pressure. Thanks for watching.